everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here to discuss major donors and how you can identify and cultivate major donors. So for those of you who I might not have met yet, my name is Stange, and I'm the NewsMatch Program Manager at INN. I'm joined today by my colleague, Stephanie Schenkel, who's the Network Philanthropy Director. So we're super excited to have you all here. This is such a big group. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This session will be recorded. So you'll get a copy of the recording and the slides, and B, don't be anything you'd be embarrassed about being posted on the internet. If you have any questions, feel free to utilize the chat, raise your hand, use the Q&A function, whatever is most convenient for you. We'll get to the questions as frequently as possible, but we do have a couple of speakers from newsrooms joining us today, so we want to make sure that we can get to that as well, and they might have some insight for you about your specific questions. So with that, I will jump right in. So before we get into the specifics of really how to go about identifying and cultivating major donors, I wanted to kind of take a minute to level set and help us get our bearings to help you drill down why you should be dedicating your precious time and energy into cultivating these donors, since I know a lot of you are wearing a lot of different hats. Many of you have participated in NewsMatch or other fundraising campaigns that target individual donors, but we want to take that a step further and really move those individual donors down the pipeline from small or mid-sized donors into a major donor who can kind of support you year over year. But why does that actually matter for you and your organization? Well, revenue growth in nonprofit news is largely due to individual giving, which currently accounts for about 40% of overall revenue across the entire field. According to the INN Index, foundation funding remained constant in 2021 overall, although it increased for larger outlets. Earned revenue was the most volatile revenue source, especially for locals, but individual giving grew for all types of outlets in 2021. And when we kind of analyze this even more deeply, major donors make up a significant portion of that donor revenue. In 2021, major donors, or individuals, in this case, we're referring to individuals who make a gift of $5,000 or more, made up the largest portion of individual giving dollars to nonprofit news. More than half of the index trend set grew in 2021, more than half of the index trend set grew the number of major donors, with the median growing from 2 major donors in 2018 to 3 major donors in 2021. So we are seeing growth in that area. And we're also seeing this trend carry through NewsMatch as well. While growth in individual giving has been a central marker of success for the program, as we kind of have seen the program evolve, we noticed something bigger was happening. It provides your newsrooms with a way to secure larger contributions from major donors, foundations, and small businesses in the form of what we call community or local matches, which are funds that are secured by you in order to bolster your year-end campaigns. In 2022, local match funds increased almost 40% over 2021, which is incredible. And we had nearly 800 individual match funders provide over $5.5 million in local matches for your year-end campaign. So first of all, round of applause there, because that's incredible growth. But where major donors play into this is they accounted for a third of the dollars raised in local matches, as well as the total number of funders for that local match incentive. So that's definitely a way that major donors can plug into both NewsMatch, but also your year-end fundraising campaigns more generally, or your year-round fundraising initiatives. So obviously central to fundraising effectiveness is building a sizable pool of donors who you can actually prospect. We know from the INN Index that securing major gifts is a primary concern for newsrooms, but it seems like many of our members don't have a large enough pool from which to draw. So those major donors remain largely out of reach. So we're hoping to provide you with a few options and solutions for that today. Some preliminary solutions include working with your boards for contacts, leveraging your audience members, elevating NewsMatch gifts, and drawing from donor interest areas. So we'll get into all of that a little bit more. But now that you kind of have a bit of a framework about the potential value of major donors for your organization, I'll pass it to Stephanie to give a bit more context about the nuts and bolts of identifying and pursuing major donors.
Thanks, Maida. I'm Stephanie Schenkel. I'm the Network Philanthropy Director here at INN. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of drilling down to how we look at major donors from our very early stages in identifying who are our prospects all the way up to stewardship. And you may have seen this diagram or something like it in the past, but essentially this gives you the full spectrum for how we approach major donors. We're going to start by obviously identifying who is in our possible donor pool. That could be potential audience members. It could be folks that are recruited by board members or identified by board members. And it could also be based on past gifts, donors that are sort of in your file already. And so you're identifying, that's your first step. Your next step is to cultivate those donors. So looking at how you cultivate donors depends a lot on the level and the capacity of those donors. So we look to tailor our cultivation based on capacity and the affinity to your organization. One of the ways that we can do that is through wealth screening. In a moment, I'm going to, or if Maida or Kem, if you'd like to put the link in the chat, I'll link to our wealth screening services in case you haven't done that yet. But that's a really good way to look at how your strategies around how you cultivate donors. So for your highest level donors, they're going to get the largest touch point. They're going to get face-to-face meetings, maybe Zoom meetings, and then all the way down to your lower level individual donors who will probably get your organizational communications, your e-blasts, social media posts, things like that. But ultimately, we're looking to figure out what is that tailoring approach for cultivating, and then making the ask, which is like the big scary part, but not so much, because we realize that if we've built that relationship effectively, that making the ask is not as challenging as we think it is if we're kind of taking these steps towards then stewarding our donors. So you're making the ask, a donor becomes part of your donor file long-term, and then you are looking to steward donors and continue to build those relationships with them. Next slide. Okay, so donor segmentation. Again, that's really about tailoring, figuring out who your donors are and how you can tailor your approach to each of your donors in your donor file, and then looking at how you goal set accordingly in your fundraising practice. So some of the areas that we're going to look at are, one, like I said, setting your fundraising goals. How much, of course, do you want to raise overall? Building your donor list. So figuring out which donors, sponsors, supporters can help you reach that goal. And again, wealth screening is one way you can look to identify and segment those donors. Then you're going to do some research. That's important because you know that you have a pool of donors, but you don't exactly know how much affinity they have to your organization or what their capacity is, or even what their willingness is to give to you. So you're looking at all of those elements in your research, perhaps creating donor profiles, and then going out and prioritizing your prospects so you can figure out how do you make touch points with each of your donors. Okay, next slide, thank you. Okay, so cultivating donors through local matches. Local matches are essentially donations or pledges that you secure on your own to increase the total amount of dollars matched by individuals during your NewsMatch campaign. Basically, local matches can come from all sorts of sources, your board members, other major donors, local businesses, and possible foundations that would like to support your work. Okay, this slide shows what we would consider kind of an ideal breakdown, gift breakdown on a $100,000 campaign goal. Now, I know some of you are not yet at $100,000. This is sort of a pie in the sky situation where you would look at the percentages, even if you're perhaps your campaign goal is $20,000 or $10,000, same kind of principle and breakdown applies. So your one-time donations, those are going to account for about $30,000 of your total pie here. NewsMatch, I know most of you are versed on NewsMatch, and that's an important part probably of your full picture of your campaign. That's about $10,000. Local matches, as we talked about before, can come from a variety of sources. Those are about $30,000, and then your recurring donations are another $30,000. Okay, here is more about wealth screening. We really think it's critically important that if you haven't done a wealth screening, you consider doing one. INN offers free wealth screenings for up to 1,000 entries. So that can be broken down in one fell swoop, or you could say we are going to screen 300 now, 300 in the next batch, and then another, 400 or whatever you decide. So as long as it amounts to 1,000, we'll do those for free in 1 year. And then beyond that, it's 20 cents an entry. And if you decide to do this wealth screening, what we're going to provide you with is an analysis of your donor file, which again is really important because it helps us to segment those donors. And then also a rating for each of your donors. So that gives you a sense of their capacity, their willingness to give, and also their giving interest areas. So while it doesn't include necessarily news and journalism, we can make a lot of deductions about what donors' interests are, and also perhaps if you have certain B areas or topic areas that you cover in your reporting, this is a good way to get a sense for what your donors care about. And we also offer wealth screening coaching sessions. So when you do your wealth screening, we will reach out and we will connect you with our wealth screening coach so that you can really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what that wealth screening means, and then create a plan for your organization that's tailored to your donors and how you can segment so that those highest level donors, again, get the highest level touch point, and you're making sure that that happens. Okay. I won't go into so much detail on this right now, but I will say that if you're interested in learning more about a range of gifts table, it's a really, really great tool to helping you think about your planning, your fundraising planning, and how you will break down gifts when they come in. Because ultimately, like I said, you're creating a fundraising goal, but then you have to figure out how to get there. And this allows you to say, okay, if I were to bring in a gift of $10,000, how many do I need? What would the total be? What is my remaining goal? And what percentage of the goal would it be? If I brought in a gift of $5,000, how many do I need? $120, et cetera. And you can sort of tailor that based on, like I said, you may not have a $100,000 campaign goal yet, and that's totally fine. But that allows you to basically break down your gifts when they come in to ensure that you're able to meet your goal, whatever that goal may be.
Stephanie, before we invite Chelsea and Jenny into the conversation, there are a couple of good questions in the chat that I wanted to surface for you. So first, Francie is asking whether wealth screening requires full addresses for every listing.
That's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I usually talk about this. Yes. So in order to complete your wealth screening, and this is actually a requirement of the program that we use, Donor Search, not a requirement of INN, we do need addresses, physical mailing addresses for each entry. If you don't have those addresses, there's a couple things you can do. One is you can just submit those that you do have, and then, like I said, we'll do up to 1,000 for free, so you can go back later. And in the meantime, you, or if you happen to have development staff on your team, can start to think about how you might go ahead and collect those addresses. And I know that can be a real process, but for those donors who have given in, say, the past 3 years, it really will benefit you to eventually collect those addresses.
Great. And then Danny would like a little bit of clarification on the campaign breakdown that you showed, the $100,000, and it would like to kind of better understand how major donors slot into that.
Yep, that's a really good question as well. So the first thing you're going to do is look at, we often talk about major donors as $5,000 or above. But again, we understand that for your organization, the first step is to look at who do you consider major donors, right? So for you, it might be $1,000 donor, and that's a really good place to start, is a major donor in your file. And then you can start to look at, again, looking at the percentages of this breakdown, where would major donors fall? So hopefully they're falling in recurring donations, and you would look at the top like 15 to 20% and say, for my organization, this is a major donor. As you move forward and you start to grow your donor file, your threshold is going to increase for your consideration of what constitutes a major donor, and that's really good. So 1,000 may become maybe becomes 2,000, et cetera. But again, looking at like that top 15 to 20% as getting the highest touch point is how I usually think about it.
Awesome. So with that, Stephanie and I can and have talked your ear off about kind of this wide range of major donors, how it works into your matches, et cetera. So we thought it might be a good idea to invite some newsrooms into the conversation who have had some success generating major donor support or are kind of starting to explore it for the first time. So now I'd like to welcome Chelsea Brown, the Development Director from Outlier Media, as well as Jenny Wellman from Gig Harbor Now to join the conversation. And I will stop sharing my screen so that we can have a bit more of a conversation here. And I will pass it back to you, Stephanie, to get us kicked off.
Great. Thanks, Maida. Thank you so much, Chelsea and Jenny, for participating today. One thing I just wanted to mention is that, keeping in mind, Chelsea is from Outlier Media, Jenny is from Gig Harbor Now. You're going to hear a little bit more about each organization. Some of the questions may apply more to one organization than the other, and that's totally fine. Or maybe they apply to some of your organizations, so we want to hear about that too. But let me get started with the questions. The first question is to tell us a little bit more about your organizations. I'm going to start with Chelsea.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on the panel. Outlier is a nonprofit organization designed to center and respond to Detroiters' needs. So we find and address information gaps and systemic failures that create harm in our community. Outlier was started in 2016 by Sarah Alvarez, and she really believed and saw that a lot of times traditional media outlets really overlook communities of color. And so she really wanted to provide information that residents needed. Just to give you guys some context about Detroit, Detroit is home to more than 632,000 residents. 78% of the population is Black, and 32% live in poverty. And so oftentimes residents really can feel undervalued as a news audience. And so Outlier really tries to counter that climate by serving as an anchor local media organization and really placing those residents' needs at the forefront of the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. Jenny.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenny Wellman with Gig Harbor Now. I am the executive director. We've been publishing now only for about 1.5 years, and so very, very new to this. But Gig Harbor is a very small, very beautiful town just south of Seattle on Puget Sound. And we're a very cohesive group, we're very community oriented. And we have a local paper, but it's declined significantly over the last number of years, as same that's happened all over the country. So people really felt a void. They really wanted to fill that void. And so a group of people got together really about 3 years ago and just started looking into what it would take to form an organization. We did form as a nonprofit and formed our board with people from the community who are very, very involved and very connected and very passionate about what we were doing. And so it's been great. Like I said, we've been publishing about 18 months and we cover everything, local sports, kids sports, city hall, politics, that sort of thing. Just great stories about, how our community got started, our Native American population and so forth. So we're just a general local community newspaper.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Like I said, two kind of different organizations, and I'm sure you're going to have some differing perspectives on some of these questions. So thanks. Okay, first question, and I'm going to start with Jenny, is I'm hoping that you could give us a little bit of context around your organization's development practice. Do you have a dedicated fundraising team? What resources do you use? And kind of what is that? How does it function?
Well, you're looking at the development team. I shouldn't say that. No, our board is very, very involved in our fundraising. And without that, we would not have been able to be as successful as we have been in the last couple of years. And, we, as I mentioned, our board are people who are very involved in the community, and it's a really cohesive group that are very passionate. And so really and truly, when we first started off, we went out and we just needed money to get started. And so we did what we called a friends and family campaign. And we raised enough money through that and a couple small grants to get ourselves going. And then we really kicked into high gear to start fundraising, to be able to hire an editor and pay our journalists and so forth. So major donors, obviously a very big part of that. And we've done a number of things to cultivate those major donors. We participated in NewsMatch for the first time last year, and between community matches and just regular donations, we raised about $50,000, which for us was really significant, which meant we received the full match from NewsMatch. This year, we set our goal the same because we weren't sure whether we'd be able to do it, and we raised $68,000 this year. So NewsMatch has been a significant part of our fundraising campaign. And I can talk later about a couple of ways we did that, but I'll let Chelsea go from here if she wants.
Great. So just to provide some context on Outlier, I know I said the organization was started in 2016. But prior to 2021, there were really only 2 full-time employees with Outlier, founder and editor-in-chief Sarah Alvarez and executive director Candace Fortman, who really led the business development. In 2021, Outlier received support through the American Journalism Project, and it really allowed the organization to, gain additional capacity. And I was part of that in terms of hiring. So a lot happened, I guess I would say, between 2021 and 2022. The size of our team grew tremendously. We also had a merger with a local news partner, Detour Detroit. And so by the end of 2022, our staff was a staff of 10 full-time employees and 1 part-time team member. Before I started, which was late October 2021, our founder and executive director did an amazing job really growing relationships and gaining early individual support through NewsMatch. So by the time I started, a lot of our supporters were ready to really talk and have deeper conversations in terms of how they could support Outlier. Today, we have a business operations team that is comprised of 3 people. It's myself, Executive Director Candace Fortman, and our Director of Operations and Finance, Erica Schottmeyer. And we really do take a collaborative approach. Each of us has a revenue goal for the year. And I would say in terms of our development practice, our executive leadership is really involved. So that's our founder and ED in terms of engaging high-level funders, and they each have their own portfolio of individual donors that they are engaging with. I really serve as the development director, as a facilitator, helping them to, connect with those individuals in terms of scheduling meetings and really providing overall strategy and implementation of how we're going to raise funds. So I guess that kind of gives a broad overview. I do want to say in terms of resources that, we're using to implement our development, we recently got a new CRM. Called Bloomerang to really help us track, donor engagement and our subscriber information. As part of that merger that we had with Detour Detroit, we each had kind of individual systems in terms of taking in donations. And so we're really excited to have a database where all our information is in one place. And I would say another thing that we've done is we completed a case for support. We use actually a consulting firm called Bash Advisory to really kind of guide us through that process in terms of just kind of redefining who we are in our talking points. So we're really excited to kind of move forward with those two resources as we engage individual donors.
Excellent. Thank you. You've both touched upon a lot. You've touched upon board development, building tools around your fundraising, and then looking at how you can sort of create plans around your fundraising. So I appreciate that. We do have one question. For the most part, we're going to wait and do a Q&A at the end, but I thought this might be relevant. So we are asking the question, what is the annual budget of each organization?
So our annual budget for this year is about 1.9 million.
Great.
Our budget's much less. Ours is about $250,000 to $250,000 per year.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I will go on to the next question. We're really going to drill down now and talk about major donors. As Maida mentioned early on, we know that bringing major donors into our donor file is critically important for how we think about growing sustainability for our organizations. So my question is, in your development plans or in your NewsMatch campaign, whatever your campaigns look like, how much does your organization rely on major donors, and what does that look like for you? I will start with Chelsea.
I would say, we're really in an early stage of developing a major donor program, but thanks to NewsMatch, we've really been able to develop a pipeline of potential major donors. So we participated in NewsMatch over the past few years, and it's really allowed us to kind of establish annual giving. And I'm sure, as most of you know, you really kind of have to set up kind of that annual fund, see who's consistently giving to your organization in order to, sort of have that pipeline of individuals who might want to give more in that higher capacity. And so for us, this year in particular, we really focused on getting supporters interested in giving more than once a year. But NewsMatch kind of set up the cadence that at least people are used to giving once a year. In terms of our annual development plan, we do have a monetary goal for getting, major gifts. And I would say primarily focused on, kind of getting our base, used to giving more than once per year. In terms of NewsMatch, we really sort of have been able to review the names of those donors and to look more closely as to who might potentially, give at a higher level towards whatever campaign we're doing.
Chelsea, how do you, so you talked a bit about NewsMatch. How are you identifying donors who may eventually become major donors to participate in NewsMatch?
Yeah, so I mean, some of it is just, and this is the funness of of development. Is more like, you have a list of names. Do you recognize the name? Who knows who? And depending on those connections and sort of the context of the relationships that we may have, we may be able to explore. No, you know, Bob is really well known in Community X, and we know he participates in, I don't know, the Rotary or the Chamber or whatnot. And so I guess I would say, based on sort of knowledge of the relationship and who that person is within the community. But we also do, a quick Google search to learn more about individuals. And we're really trying to look at a couple of things through that search. First, does the donor have the financial ability to make a larger gift to our organization? And so that's really determined through, are they involved with other charities? What do they do, career-wise? We've had the opportunity to be involved in a program with INM where we were able to get some donor names reviewed. And so I know in particular for our NewsMatch campaign in 2021, when I came in, I was able to look at that information as well. The second question I'm looking at is, does the donor have a relationship with our organization? Can we get a meeting with them? Because, a lot of times people are like, oh, why don't you get, Oprah or, some big name to give to your organization? And the reality of it is they have no affiliation. So we're really focused on connecting with the people that we know, and moving forward, trying to get a meeting with them and see if they're actually interested.
Exactly. That's great. If I had a dime for every time someone asked me that question of why can't we get Oprah or whomever as a donor? Yes. So I totally understand that. Jenny, I know you have sort of a unique experience around how you engage your board and how your board contributes to the process. Can you talk about your, specifically your work around major donors and how that looks?
Yes. So yes, we do. I do have a very engaged board, as I mentioned before. And so, our approach was something that I actually learned from other organizations. And we actually started a membership program. We call it our leadership circle. And I think that's a common term that people use a lot. We called it leadership circle because we think that the people who participate in this membership are the leaders in the community, and we wanted to go out and identify who those people were and know that they would have more than just a one-year commitment to us. And so we set up this leadership circle membership, and what it is for us, a major donor is about $1,000. So we went out and looked at who donated to us before, and we set a goal of, or a threshold of 500 or more. And we started kind of segmenting those people out, who knew that person, who didn't, and we reached out to them. And what we're asking for in our leadership circle pledge is a donation of at least $1,000 per year for 3 years, a minimum of 3 years. And we were very successful with it. We now have over $43,000 in pledges for the next, starting 2022, for the next 2 years after this. So it set us up, and we did it. We started the program during the summer where we could reach out to people and set it up so that would start happening during NewsMatch, which meant reaching our NewsMatch goal was kind of a slam dunk for us, which was really great. But I agree with Chelsea. You have to find that connection, and you have to find people who have a passion for what you're doing. And if you don't, I've approached a few people I know would donate larger sums of money, but they just don't have a passion for what we're doing. Maybe they like to support food banks or homelessness or something else. And so, it's perfectly understandable. But reaching out to those people is super important. Having a connection with someone on your board or someone who's associated with your organization in some way is also really great. You want to know, what are their interests? What other things do they support in the community? And as I said, we are a small community, so I can go to another local nonprofit and look at their donor board, and I can see, who's donating to them and what they're supporting. And that's kind of a sneaky way of doing it, but it's also very successful. So again, like I said, this leadership program really helped us a lot and reach out to those people who are major donors. And then we had a few people who said no, they didn't want to commit to a 3-year time frame, but they would give us $5,000 or $15,000, and we used those donations as community matches. So that's really what our success was this year.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny. I can't see everybody's faces, but I know that there's a lot of jealous faces out there who are saying to themselves, I want to build a leadership circle. So if that is the case for you, it's a really great tool. In addition to that range of gifts chart I showed you, a leadership circle, people are always asking us, like, what kind of tools can we use to build our major gifts program? And that's one that we can either refer you to Jenny to talk about, or I'm happy to offer some suggestions and coaching if you are interested. So thank you for mentioning that.
Can I just add
yeah,
something real quick?
Yep.
I was going to say, we don't have a leadership circle, and really, right now we're trying to nurture that group, that small group, of individuals who are giving a significant gift, which is really $1,000 or more for us. And I guess as part of that, the focus is really tapping into our board and seeing if they can make some introductions this year. And one of the things that we're exploring, even with that small group of, donors who are giving at a high level, is whether any of them will host like a house party, an old school house party. And so we kind of have one in the works where there's an individual who is given to us significantly. And, I'm really looking forward to it. They invite some of their friends, we invite some of the agency's friends. And it's an opportunity to really kind of share about the mission, and then see if people want to fund the mission right then and there. And even if it's not, a 4-figure gift or something, we see that as still super valuable as providing sort of that first, touch point. And it's allowing us to grow our base and gives a pipeline for potential major donors.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
for
Can I just
mentioning
jump in there real
Yep.
super fast? So Chelsea, that is great. And,
Thanks.
and it gets to, the 4 stages of the development of a major donor is the stewardship.
Yes.
And so we're about to launch the same thing. We're going to invite our leadership circle memberships and our other major donors to, we're going to try and find a speaker. We have couple of people in mind that we would have, and we have this beautiful foundation building that's right in downtown Gig Harbor, looking right over the water with seals swimming by all the time. And we're going to invite people to, similar to what you're talking about, not a house party, but a party. And, have people bring their friends, or, tell us who they think might also be interested. And, but it gets back to stewardship. You have to really follow through with your donors. And then they will in turn help build that database of names.
Yes, exactly. I think you're really touching on some of as we're talking about strategies for, I think one of the questions people often have, and rightfully so, is, okay, I want to build my donor base, but how do I go about doing that? And they're struggling to figure out, like, how do I identify these folks? And I want to have a NewsMatch campaign, but I really have nobody to include. So these kind of gatherings, now we're fortunate enough to be able to have them again in person, but even sometimes they can be Zoom gatherings. We think face-to-face is probably most effective, but it really depends upon your organization as well, because you're both local organizations. We have some folks out there who just can't do a face-to-face meeting. And for you, perhaps some online venue works, but those are excellent ways to think about how to bring in donors. So I'm going to ask a quick question and then one kind of closing question before I open it up to our group. quick question is, starting with Chelsea, what is one recommendation that you have for newsrooms who might be pursuing a major donor for the first time?
Yeah, it's
Kind
hard
of
to
a
narrow
tip.
it down to one, but I'm gonna try to be patient because people are super busy. And so I would just say follow up, and then follow up again. So
Excellent.
just be patient in your pursuit.
Patient but persistent, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Jenny.
Well, I agree with Chelsea on being patient. And that's one of the hardest things I think about fundraising, you know, in both grant writing and everything else. It's patience is very important. But I think I kind of touched on it before. From our standpoint is do your research, figure out who else they're donating to, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in. And the well screening is really, really important too, to then kind of decide at what level you're going to ask somebody for a donation, but also be willing to start small. You know, if
Mhm.
they give you $500, that's great, you know, and you can build that $500 donation into $1,000 donation next time, just like we did with our leadership circle membership and how we approach those people. But you know, I think the best is always to try to find a personal connection if you can. With us, we're very involved in Rotary. We're involved in our Waterfront Alliance group. We're involved in the Chamber of Commerce. You know, just anything that you can to, and also just get yourself out in front of those people. Get on their schedule and talk to them and find out who's in the room. And, you know, I think you really learn a lot that way. And then it's just cultivating that relationship, just continuing to talk to them in different ways and, you know, get that connection going.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. So our final question before we open it up to questions from our group is I want to talk a little bit about messaging. So we know that for many of you, approaching foundations is much more within your comfort zone than approaching major donors and individual donors. So Jenny and Chelsea, when you think about how you approach major donors or even individuals just generally, what is your message and how does that differ, if at all, from when you approach a foundation? I will start with Chelsea.
I mean, first and foremost, and this goes off of what Jenny was saying, I'm trying to form a connection. That's what I'm trying to do. So, you know, a lot of times the communication is going to be tailored based on what I know about the person and their potential interest area. But really, the first thing I'm trying to do is to get that initial point of contact so I can learn more about their interests. And that'll help me with to develop future communications.
So for me, the difference I see with a foundation versus a private donor, I mean, they're similar in many ways, but so for me with a foundation or even a corporate sponsorship, it's about partnership, which is, I mean, that's what an individual donor wants as well. But so for instance, we went out to a foundation initially and said, you know, would you be interested in supporting us? And they came back and said, well, we don't really see how what you're doing fits into our mission. And what we said was, well, we fit directly into your mission because we support all of those things that you support in the community. You support our fish food bank, you support this nonprofit or this other thing. And we're doing the stories that are telling about all of those things and what's happening in the community. And instantly there was a connection there. Instantly that person came around and we wound up getting a $30,000 grant from them. So, so just trying to find, you know, first of all, understand about what a foundation wants to support or what they do support, and then how you can connect into that. I'm sorry, I forgot the last part. So yeah, that's the main thing is, and then with an individual donor, again, it's just what their interests are and what they would want to support.
But it's so great working with those individuals because they're flexible. They are flexible. They're not tied to sort of the agenda of, a larger entity. And so it's interesting working with individuals because I don't know, it seems like, they can shift, they can change, they're okay. It's just a more flexible process than working with a
Absolutely,
foundation.
absolutely. So I had one donor who is a fellow Rotarian, and she agreed to support us at a much smaller amount, and she had a couple of issues with some things that were written. And as time has gone on, she wound up coming up to me a couple weeks ago and said, I really just love what you guys are doing. And I'm so sorry that I didn't initially support, you on a different level. And she said, I can now see the value, and, and so we will wind up getting a much larger donation from her in the future. So, again, we're brand new. And so it's, we kind of have to prove ourselves in what we're writing and how we're making that connection to our community. And that community engagement is so important.
Thank you. Thank you both. You're right. I think there's so much that's similar about the messaging that we use for foundations and major donors, but then you're right, Chelsea and Jenny. I think when you think about that fear that you might have about approaching a major donor, you also need to think about the fact that you will not be turned away because you did not write enough characters. You will not be turned away because you didn't adequately articulate your mission or your partners. So there's a lot more flexibility in that ability to build relationships and to make some mistakes and then correct them over time, right? So thank you both. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to our group for questions. It looks like we have a few in the chat already, and we'll get through probably three or four here. So if you have a question in the chat, please enter it in the chat. If we don't get to it, we will try to forward those along to, I can answer some, or we'll forward them along to Chelsea and Jenny to answer after. So our first question is from Eduardo, and he is asking, is there a form that you use as a one-pager for building donor files? Chelsea, you talked about this a little bit, and we talked about with both our wealth screening process, if you've done one, or just Googling folks, like how do you have a form that you use or a system that helps you look at building those? And if you don't,
I do have a template. I have a template that I use when I go in for a donor meeting, which basically it gives me space to provide the agenda. I have some questions that I might ask them during the meeting. And then those questions that I reviewed about in terms of capacity, affiliation, and interests, I have those on there as well. So it's just a very simple document, a Word document, and it's just comprised of maybe questions or things I like to learn about that donor.
Great. We can share some of those around. Jenny, I don't know if you have anything different or if you're good.
No, okay. I don't have anything different.
Okay, great. The next question is from Leslie, and it's around your leadership circle dinner. Do they buy tickets or is it free?
No, so we see our leadership circle members as being sort of our founding donors, and what we want to do for them is provide them something a little bit different. We want to make sure that we're giving value to their donation, and so no, we will not charge them for this event at all. And it's not going to be seen as a fundraiser. We're not there asking for money. We're there to tell them this is what our mission, and this is part of our mission, and you've supported it, and we appreciate it. That's all.
Same with you, Chelsea? Or
we've done, yes. Last year, well, for the first time, we sort of did a spring spritzer, and we invited all of our supporters, donors, members, everyone was invited. Of course, it's just complimentary. And of course, it's nice because it's June in Detroit and it's nice weather. So, people showed up and it was a happy hour. So yeah, we like doing something fun just to say thank you to our supporters.
Yep. And that answers one also from Leslie, a question around how you thank your major donors. Let's go to that real quick. And then Andy, I'm going to go to your question next.
We thank our major donors. I guess I would say handwritten notes. Old school, but it works, you know, just a handwritten note from like our executive director or founder, sometimes from me. And also one of the things that we're going to start this year, which I've done at other organizations, is just personal calls, having, you know, board members call and say a personal thank you.
Same thing for us. Whenever we get a major donation, whenever we get a donation of any type, our CRM system sends out an automatic thank you to them, which is great, but it's not great for a larger donor. And so I send out, I do print out a letter, and I usually write some personal note on that letter and I send it to them. And actually, honestly, our board members who have been the ones who've cultivated that relationship, they almost always send a personal note too. That's one of the most important things. That's the biggest part of stewardship.
Personalization is really key, and thank yous. And as you think about, I maybe should have mentioned this earlier, but as you think about segmenting your donor file, you could also think about what is so we talk about touch points for the ask, right? And for the request, but you can also think about what are your touch points for thanking your donors, because you can't necessarily, as your donor file grows, write a thank you note to every single person, nor can your board members, but perhaps there's 3 levels, and the highest level gets a note from the board member, and the middle level gets a note from one of you or development person, and then maybe just the standard thank you. You can also do videos, you can do all sorts of things, but just thank them personally. That's the key.
Very key, yes.
Okay, question from Andy, and answer this kind of the best you can. Any tips on how to engage major donors when you're building a vision for expansion or a new venture? So it's new venture, sorry. So it's not fully baked necessarily, but you want to get out there and make the ask and start to nurture those folks. Have you had any experience kind of doing that when something is still yet to be determined as far as what the full project might look like?
I think for me, that's pretty much what I did. You know, I mean, we started our news organization from the ground up. And so we just, you know, we had to kind of reach out to, you know, anybody that we could in any way that we could. So I don't know that I don't know, Chelsea, what do you think? Is it that different from I don't know if you've done a startup or
We're still a startup.
Yeah.
It's only been a couple years. So I would say we always try to give information in detail for what we know. You know, we've been focused on getting kind of general operating funds. So we haven't done kind of like a targeted ask for a particular program.
Right.
In past experience, when we've done that, you know, it is best if you're doing like a targeted, focused, you know, raising effort for a particular like program or service. You should try to have as much of the facts down as possible, I would say, because donors are going to want to be updated if they invest into, you know, said program.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to do one final question and then we'll close for the day. I can also answer this question to some extent. So we have a question from Laura Taylor, and that's around cultivation touches and touch points for those organizations who have donors living all over the country. So I recognize that both of you are local, but I bet you have some touch points that maybe could transfer to national donors. So if you have some, please share, and if not, I can give some ideas as well.
I think that's a little out of my scope at this point in time. We don't, you know, we are so hyper local that we don't really have that situation. So maybe Chelsea is better for this.
I would say the only thing I can offer is we did sort of a meet and greet coffee hour with our founder and executive director last year. We do have supporters who are in California, in Chicago. And so it was an opportunity. We hosted 3 during the year via Zoom. And so it was an opportunity for people to, tune in and join us and have, more conversation.
That's
But
great.
that's
Yeah.
all we've done so far.
Those are great. And I would say, to answer this question, anything that you might think about doing if you were a local organization, I would say to myself, how could I make that a virtual
Mm.
engagement opportunity? And think about, like, in the same way that we at INN are responsible for supporting all of you members across the country, how can we make a really intimate feeling meeting, webinar, interaction online specifically for our major donors? Like, what can we do? As you said, Chelsea, maybe you would go out and have coffee with a donor if you lived a mile or 5 miles away from them, but maybe there's a virtual coffee opportunity. Maybe there is opportunity to do to connect with folks via email. Like I said, videos are a really good way to show donors what your organization does without them seeing it in person. You can do tours of your office or an interview with reporters, any way that they can sort of get that inside scoop into your organization or newsroom, and they feel that they have that they've had the opportunity to see something that the general public wouldn't. And if you can do that in a way that is virtual, all the better. But that's a really good question. And we want to make sure that that our answers are relevant to all of our newsrooms. And many of ours are have donors who are not in their local communities. So that is a really great question. And thank you. I think we are going to stop there. First of all, I want to thank Chelsea and Jenny. This has been a really engaging conversation. I know I learned a lot from both of you, and I hope that the group also walked away with some tips around how to build your major donor base and how to cultivate them. So thank you very much. If you have further questions, please reach out to me, to Maida, to Chelsea or Jenny, and we're happy to answer any questions or provide resources. So thank you all, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye.